You're listening to Dodge Movie Podcast. Your hosts are Christi and Mike Dodge, the founders of Dodge Media Productions. We produce films and podcasts, so this is a podcast about films. Join them as they share their passion for filmmaking.
I'm Christi Dodge, and I'm here with Mike in our den, and we are starting a podcast about movies.
What are we going to talk about on this podcast, Christi?
We are going to talk about the movies that we love, because we do that anyway. We spend most of our waking time breaking down, dissecting, and loving movies.
Well, that's true, but why should anyone care what we have to say about movies?
Well, not only am I an award-winning filmmaker, I'll have you know. I went to film school, so that makes me ultimately qualified.
Oh, and you graduated.
I did graduate. My love of movies started when I was really young. I have a vivid memory of coming out of Pete's Dragon as a kid with my parents, who like a weekend or two before had told me they were getting a divorce.
Okay, this is awesome because my first movie memory is not long after my dad died, and I was taken to see Bambi at the drive-in, and all I remember is the scene where his mom dies in the forest fire. So fantastic traumatic memories. Why are we in movies again?
I know. So movies have always just been a source of comfort, of pleasure, of enjoyment, and I can track a lot of different big moments in my life through movies. In high school, my mom said I should work in a video store because I always knew who was in all the movies. I knew the actors. I knew like what movies were being made.
I still can't believe it when I talk to someone and they don't know who Ray Liotta is and what movies he's been in. Isn't that weird?
So why don't you share with us your personal history with movies, Mike?
Well, as I did mention, my first movie memory was a little bit off, but I came back anyway. I always liked writing and photography in movies, and it didn't dawn on me that the first and the second could be used to make the third until quite a bit later in my life. But I do have some kind of memories, right? I have a vivid sense memory of going to the West Cove Theater, and they had these eucalyptus trees out in this little kind of alleyway between two buildings, and that smell of the eucalyptus as we were waiting for movies. They had a cobblestone kind of walkway, and we had this summertime program, at least one summer, where you got these little cards. They're about the size of the Monopoly property cards back in the day, and they have punches, and so every Tuesday afternoon, we could walk down there. Again, this is a long, long time ago. Children were allowed to walk on their own places. You could go down on Tuesdays and you'd see a movie, and it was kind of like the movies they would show at the library. They were not in circulation. They were quote-unquote family movies, and there was some cartoon shorts ahead of time. And so I remember that. That was a pretty big deal for me. And one of the things that I loved about the movies, to be quite honest, is it was air-conditioned and shady. And growing up in Southern California, that was a big deal. I lived in a house without air conditioning, the one. It was pretty rough. So I loved going to the movies, laughing, having a little snack, getting some cool air. It was pretty good. But I think really I started to understand that I was a little bit weird when it came to movies when I was in high school. Because as soon as I had a day job working burgers, like everyone does, and some money, and I could drive myself places, I would go to the movies. And I was that kid who went to the movies by himself. And I remember I watched Siskel and Ebert, and they talked about this movie, David Lynch's Blue Velvet. I thought, wow, I like movies. They talked a lot about it. Let me go see that movie. Wow, that was weird. That was a little much for a 16-year-old me. In fact, Friday nights, my friend Eric and I, we would go see the movie, whatever was currently playing. That was such a part of kind of my whole growing up. That was an art form that I consumed. That was a media that I understood. And that's how I kind of communicated about life. I would often describe things like with a log line, Clerks meets Harry met Sally. I guess people thought I was weird, but I eventually gravitated to the people who also seemed to consume movies.
Yes. So I want to tell our love story, which is so enmeshed in movies, and not just our I guess our lifelong love story, but our own family's culture is embedded in the movies. So it started off with our first date. We went and saw Sleepless in Seattle. And after the movie, we stood under a streetlight next to your truck and smooched for a good hour, if not more, I bet.
I don't know. I wasn't timing it.
So that was our first date. So that was Sleepless in Seattle.
I apparently loved rom-coms and didn't know it because I chose Sleepless in Seattle, which one could argue is a good date movie, right? It's got
It's a
rom
fabulous
right
date movie.
and comedy. Chicks dig laughing. But at that time, also out in theaters, tiny little films like Jurassic Park and The Firm, Last Action Hero, Dennis the Menace, Boxing Helena, and California are some of the films that were in theaters at the time. And of that delicious selection of big movies, I chose the little rom-com set in the Pacific Northwest.
Yes. And funny that you mentioned The Firm, because that was our second film. So we must have been between the two. After our first date, I was working in Lake Tahoe as a nanny for a couple weeks, and you drove up. We went out to the movie. I lied to you because I had already seen The Firm.
Yeah, there was a lie.
Yeah, that was my first lie.
I noticed that when in the film, out of my peripheral vision, I noticed somebody staring at me. And what? It was my date. She's just eyeballing me.
I could not believe that there was a decent guy who wanted to take me out on a date. I couldn't believe you were real.
You're a good date. You enjoy like Mexican food, and then you like movies. Who wouldn't want to take you on a date? I mean, I'm surprised there wasn't a line.
Aw, you're so sweet. But there hadn't been up until you. So that's why I just wanted to make sure you weren't a figment of my imagination. Okay. And then I remember our kids' first movies. It was so important to me that their first movie was like a good, decent movie. You know, it wasn't just a throwaway kids movie. It was no, what was the one with Alec Baldwin? The Boss.
There's no Boss Baby.
It was no Boss Baby.
Yeah.
Like it was going to be a high quality movie for my kids. And
Boss Baby 2.
And so I'm a big Pooh fan when the kids were little. Brennan's or our oldest nursery was decorated in Winnie the Pooh. So his first movie was the Tigger movie. Cameron's favorite movie was Finding Nemo. And I remember we went to Las Vegas to see Celine Dion. I remember walking the strip and seeing the signs for Finding Nemo all over the place and thinking it is so bleeping hot. It would be so nice to go into an air-conditioned movie theater and watch Finding Nemo. But we resisted because we knew we were going to take the boys to see it when we got home.
Maybe we could have gone and seen The Firm for a third time.
This time you could have stared at me.
Yeah, that would have been fair.
And then my last on my notes here, movie is in June of 2002. So Cameron was about a year old. So that's when Mike was great about taking Brennan out on weekends sometimes so that when Cameron took naps, I could rest. And you guys went to see Monsters, Inc.
Took him to a movie, of course.
So, yeah. So Brennan's 4 years old and he comes in and he's all excited. He's had a great time. And I say, how was it? And he said, oh my God, it was so funny. There was this one scene and he goes on to tell me, and he's talking so fast, and because I have no context, I really don't know what he's talking about, but I can tell that he enjoyed it so much. And he says there was a critter and Boo had this bat and she was hitting Randall over and over and over. And every time she would hit him, his color would change at first, but then like he changed to plaid and he changed to gingham, or he changed to houndstooth. And he said, and Daddy yaffed and yaffed and yaffed.
I did. It's hilarious.
We are super excited to share our insights with you. We want this to encourage you to go watch these movies. We hope to focus on some indie movies that don't get the big industry marketing budgets. Maybe you've never heard of this movie. We're going to talk about them from a storytelling perspective, the things that we love that excite us about the movies, that make them engaging and effective storytelling.
Oh, yeah, cinematography and costumes and sound editing and composition of things, and maybe a little bit in acting and directing, but a lot of stuff that hopefully is accessible to a person who has not gone to film school, but who has an appreciation and love for movies. And I find that when I talk to people who aren't involved in the process of making them and describe some of these things, it's really exciting to a lot of people. They just don't have a way to learn this kind of information, to have other people to geek out with over this. But once you bring it up to people, they find it interesting. So we're figuring, hey, maybe some of our listeners will also find it interesting.
Yes. And we want you guys to engage with us. We'll give you all our social media tags and all that stuff.
We invite you to watch the same movie that we are announcing we'll watch for the next episode. Yeah. So then we can have kind of an informed discussion. Also, feel free to send us recommendations of films that you think are worthy of us watching and talking about.
That's our podcast. We hope you enjoy it. Please join us for our first episode. We're going to review Sleepless in Seattle, which was our first movie, and part of the movie takes place on February 14th. So it'll be very meta to watch it. Hit subscribe. Join us on all our social media, Dodge Media Productions. This is the Dodge Movie Podcast.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for listening to Dodge Movie Podcast with Christi and Mike Dodge of Dodge Media Productions. To find out more about this podcast and what we do, go to dodgemediaproductions.com. Subscribe, share, leave a comment, and tell us what we should watch next. Dodges never stop, and neither do the movies.